For the last few days, friends and family have been telling me about this case. They've been asking me if I know anything about it, have I seen any videos about it, and honestly, this is the first time I'm hearing about it. But I Googled it and it is everywhere. It is a massive story. Like, who is she? What did she do? I mean, I think she did something really bad. Genuinely, I have no idea. I've tried to sort of completely not find anything out about it so that, this is the first I hear about it, but whatever she did must be awful.
New disturbing details revealed in the case of Lindsay Clancy, the New England mom accused of strangling her 3 young children to death after a fun afternoon playing in the snow.
God.
Lindsay's defense alleges she was suffering postpartum psychosis, but new details revealed by the prosecution could tell a different story. We're hearing from a reporter who was on the scene the day of the murders and what she makes of the arguments ahead. This is Scandal, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Sierra Gillespie.
Jeez, what the But why?
The case of Lindsay Clancy is a true tragedy. A young and beautiful mother knowingly strangles her 3 young children to death in their upscale home, leaving her husband and their father to discover the lifeless bodies. It's a chilling story on so many levels, and the devastating question remains: did Lindsay Clancy have a mental break, or was this cold-blooded murder? Court documents filed just this month are giving new insight into the prosecution's theory that Lindsay Clancy knowingly murdered her young children, allegedly acting with premeditation. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts says they've got enough evidence to prove to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that theory. And if they do just that, Lindsay Clancy will spend the rest of her life in prison. But Lindsay and her...
shouldn't she do anyway? I get it, postpartum depression, I get it. Super serious medical condition, but she still took those 3 kids' lives.
Her husband, Patrick, have been steadfast from the start. This was a mental health crisis. Lindsay doesn't deny murdering her children, but she says she wasn't in the right state of mind when it happened.
What?
And by now, you've at least heard of this case, but I'll give you a quick recap just in case. Lindsay and Patrick Clancy got married in December 2016. They moved into a beautiful home in Duxbury, Massachusetts, which is a quaint and upscale town on the South Shore. Lindsay worked as a nurse at the renowned Mass Gen Hospital in Boston, and by all accounts was really loving and very dedicated to her patients. But according to multiple reports, Lindsay's demeanor changed after having kids. She reportedly started to develop anxiety and depression, especially after her 2nd and 3rd children. By January 2023, Lindsay and Patrick Clancy share 3 kids. Their oldest daughter, 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old son Dawson, and 8-month-old son Callan. But Lindsay's symptoms had allegedly gotten progressively worse. Her defense team will later say that Lindsay was struggling with bipolar disorder and severe postpartum depression, maybe even the rare postpartum psychosis. She'd even been seen by some of the top mental health experts in the country, spending time in McLean Psychiatric Hospital just north of Boston for her struggles with thoughts of self-harm. Her stay there happened in the weeks before the murders, but her mental health treatment started way before that. According to court docs, Lindsay had been on a regimen of up to 13 different psychotropic meds, both to monitor her mood and her sleep. Her husband, Patrick, would later file a lawsuit against doctors, claiming this large amount of drugs actually hurt her more than it helped. And
yeah, to be fair, because those 13 medications, they might have had ingredients that weren't compatible with some of the other ones.
And in fact, altered her mental state. So Patrick had been so worried about Lindsay, her concerning journal entries, he hardly left her home alone. Either he would stay with her and the kids, or a family member would actually come and do the same. But that's not what happened the day of the murders, January 24th, 2023. That morning, the Clancy's oldest daughter, Cora, was having some stomach issues, so Lindsay took her to the doctor for an appointment. When she got back, Lindsay and the kids played outside in the snow, even building a snowman. Around 4 p.m., Lindsay Googled the 3V restaurant in Plymouth, and she looked up the driving distance from her home to the restaurant. And this is important because prosecutors will later argue that Lindsay murdered the children with premeditation, making sure that Patrick would be out of the house long enough that she could complete the act without any interruption. But
can someone please explain what postpartum depression is. Like, because my best guess is that, so after you've gone through, like the 9 months, when you finally have the baby, maybe because that journey is over, the pregnancy, you become depressed. But how would that manifest into wanting to harm your kids? Like, how? I can't really make that connection. Like, how is it just that it mentally messes you up so bad that you just do anything? I just can't imagine why you would want to harm your kids.
According to a lawsuit filed by Lindsay's team, that's not what happened. Yes, she did send Patrick out to get dinner, and yes, she did ask him to run to CVS to pick up something for Cora. But after that, she says she suffered a severe mental break, and this is straight from Lindsay's lawsuit, quote, "As soon as Patrick left to pick up the food, there was a loud, demanding, repetitious voice. 'This is your last chance. You have to kill the kids so you can kill yourself.'"
What the hell? Oh my God.
Lindsay's team argues she felt a force come over her and started to experience a series of hallucinations. She says she experienced a dreamlike state where she had no choice but to follow these voices' instructions, and described watching herself carry out the murders. Lindsay described, "I lost all control. My body started acting without any control on my part. I was just following commands. All action. The voice demanded action." Lindsay proceeded to strangle each of her children, uttering, "Go to God, baby."
Oh my God. Jesus, man. That is dark. That is dark. I just don't understand. Like, that's still your child. Like, I get depression is awful. I understand. But this is like beyond the pale. I'm sorry.
Prosecutors say Lindsay used exercise bands to strangle each one of her children before ingesting a substantial amount of medications, cutting her wrists and neck, and jumping out of a second-story window to land on the frozen ground beneath her. She suffered severe injuries from the jump and remains permanently paralyzed to this day.
Oh, that's why she's in a wheelchair.
And here's where the new details of the case comes in from the filings that were made in just the past couple of days. The Commonwealth has filed a motion to include Patrick Clancy's 911 call at trial. They say shows, quote, "deliberate premeditation, extreme atrocity, or cruelty at the hands of Lindsay Clancy." According to the Commonwealth, the 911 recording depicts Patrick Clancy running into the home and calling out for his kids before finding the bodies of Cora, Dawson, and Callan in the basement.
Can you imagine how he felt seeing those? Can you imagine the pain, the anguish, the sadness? It's unimaginable. All three of his kids.
As police headed into the basement, Mr. Clancy yelled out,
"Oh my God.
She killed the kids." Prosecutors argue the recording of Patrick calling for help has significant probative evidentiary value to prove Lindsay's alleged premeditation and the extreme atrocity or cruelty of her alleged actions. And a lot of this alleged significant evidence stems from the exercise bands. And I will note once again, Lindsay isn't denying that she did it. This isn't a whodunit case. Lindsay's defense says she did kill her children, but that she was mentally unwell in the process. The prosecution, however, disagrees and says they have proof based on the state the exercise bands were found in. According to the filing, quote, "The timing of when he found each child and the manner in which they were discovered is probative of how they were killed." Cora, Dawson, and Callan were each strangled with a separate exercise band, and the band used to strangle each child was found around their necks by Mr. Clancy. First responders then found each band lying next to each child when they reached the basement because Mr. Clancy had removed the bands from the necks of Cora, Dawson, and Callan as he found each of them. The spontaneous and excited nature of the 911 call, made prior to any reflective thought, further establishes that the bands were wrapped around each child's neck in a fashion that negates any theory that they were tied or knotted. According to the filing, Patrick later gave police and grand jury testimony, reporting that the exercise bands around both Cora and Callan's necks had been tied with a knot, almost like a shoelace loop that was easy to remove relatively. However, in the case of Dawson's exercise band, Patrick testified it was tied a lot tighter and he actually had to pull it over Dawson's head. Why is all of this important?
Yeah, I mean, how does that, prove that she was, insane or not?
Well, the Commonwealth argues that if the exercise bands were knotted, that could mean Lindsay tied them tightly and then just walked away while the children were strangled to death. But if the exercise bands were just looped around their necks like shoelace ties, it means that Lindsay would have to manually pull the bands until each of her children strangled to death, which could take multiple minutes to complete. Basically, the prosecution believes the latter, and we can expect them to argue Lindsay choked each of her children methodically, one after the next, strangling them as they fought in a prolonged and physical effort,
But can an insane person not do calculated actions? I mean, just because somebody is insane doesn't mean they can't do things that require mental effort. Like, it's not like everything an insane person does is completely just random and sporadic. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how that proves that this was premeditated. Not saying that she is innocent of premeditated murder, just that I don't know how the way she tied the bands is significant.
Into the prosecution, that would show deliberate and extreme cruelty. Now, in the filing, prosecutors also petitioned the court to show jurors the locations in the case, namely the Clancy home, the restaurant where Patrick went to pick up food, and the CVS, just to show how far each of these locations is away from each other. And they also requested a blood spatter expert be allowed to testify, to which the defense actually pushed back. Lindsay's team filed a motion just one day after the Commonwealth, writing, quote, "Wherefore the defendant requests that this court exclude all bloodstain pattern analysis testimony and or conduct an evidentiary Lanigan hearing before permitting any such testimony."
Am I crazy for saying that, the fact that she's actually Lindsay is basically trying to avoid going to prison is kind of indicative of the guilt? The guilt should be so overwhelming that she shouldn't really care what happens to her. Do you know what I mean? God forbid, I feel like if a parent did that to their kids and they were truly insane, the overwhelming pain of the loss, they wouldn't care whether they go to prison or a psychiatric ward. Do you see what I mean? Why does she care where she goes? I mean, it's...
Limit any expert testimony to objective observations of physical stains and prohibit reconstruction opinions regarding positions, movement, intentions, deposit of the substance, or any actions of any participant. Even though her trial is just around the corner, there's still a lot of prep work ahead, a lot to go through for attorneys and reporters covering the case. And actually, that's just what our guest is today. It's CBS Boston reporter Christina Rex, who's also an attorney. And Christina, you've been following this case since day one. So thank you for coming on Scandal today and kind of giving us your expertise. And let me ask you about that, going way back to January of 2023. I mean, were you there? Were you covering it the day of the murders?
Yeah, unfortunately I was. And as a reporter, this was probably top three.
I don't know. I'm getting a feeling that I just don't believe the insanity argument. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not her lawyer. I can't read her mind, but all three of her kids are gone at her hands. Even though it's 3 years past, the guilt and the pain, I would imagine, would be so overwhelming that her demeanor just seems, I don't know, numb. Where's the emotion? Where's the suffering? I don't know.
Worst crime scenes I've ever been to. I've been a reporter for a decade, so I've been to a lot of crime scenes. And I distinctly remember this one because it was nighttime and the police officers were crying. So that always stuck out to me because I was sent there as kind of like a breaking news situation. We didn't really know what was going on. We were working to learn more information, but then there ended up being a press conference, I remember, near the scene that night. And when I got there, the officers who were coming out of the house who were investigating were crying. So we knew, we being the media, we knew that something really serious had happened inside that house because it was obviously affecting law enforcement. And it was just the most somber, heartbreaking, otherworldly, unbelievable crime scene I've ever been sent to.
As you were describing it, I almost got chills on my body just hearing about that because you and I both know, having worked in this industry, we talk about really, really difficult things. And the police officers, the first responders, see really, devastating things. So we almost have to put up a shell to not really get affected. So when something breaks through that shell and they're just crying, it's a really, really devastating case. And that's what we found based on all of the facts that have come out. But what's interesting to me about this case too is so many people have almost come to Lindsay Clancy's defense, saying,
Really?
this is a psychosis situation. She had a mental break. What do you make of all of that?
I mean, I think that's going to be the entire crux of her case. I think it surprised a lot of people when she was, charged with premeditated murder for all three of her children because
Like, guys, even if it was a psychotic break, surely the act of the first kid that she ended, the screams of the horror of that, you don't think that would be enough to snap her out of that? And for her to realize what the heck she's doing? Like, to do all three like that, then to move on to the next one and then the next one. You don't think that as their mum, she would whoa, what am I doing? Do you know what I mean?
as
don't
soon
know.
as the details of this situation came out, including the fact that Lindsay Clancy allegedly attempted to take her own life in the same sort of episode, the whole conversation was around postpartum psychosis. And I think that's what a lot of people either assumed or were told had happened. And so I think that's going to end up being the crux of the case. And certainly for Lindsay Clancy's defense team, that's what they're going to want the jury to be focusing on rather than what actually happened.
But how can you not focus on what happened, though? How can you not focus on what she actually did?
Yeah, because the defense isn't saying this isn't a whodunit kind
You're
of
right.
thing.
Yeah,
It's
we
not somebody
know.
broke in and this happened. They're saying, yes, Lindsay did do this, but it was because of her mental health status at the time. I mean, they talk about her journal entries that were very harrowing. She had actually been placed at McLean, so she was having psychiatric care, multiple different kinds of prescriptions that she was on, kind of all added up to this. And I guess I'm wondering, based on your experience in Massachusetts, what is it like if she's coming forward with this defense that she is not guilty by reason of, mental insanity, the differences between states and like the statutes of what it's called. But basically her defense is saying, I had this psychosis and that's what caused me to commit this crime. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, what you exactly just said is going to be what her defense attempts to prove. Lindsay Clancy is not denying what happened, she's denying why it happened. And that's a complicated and nuanced argument to make in front of a jury. I did cover one other case where a police officer was killed and the defense was not guilty by reason of insanity. And the first trial ended in a mistrial. The second trial nearly had a hung jury. And then ultimately they did convict the man. But it's a complicated and hard defense. And so that's what her defense is going to be trying to prove. Yes, this happened, but it happened because their client was in this state of psychosis. And what they really will need to prove is just that Lindsay Clancy didn't have the mindset, what's called the mens rea, the criminal intent to do what she did. She didn't, according to her defense, desire to kill her three children. They're going to have to prove that that mental capacity was lacking at the time that the crime occurred.
But the thing is, like, in the UK at least, you would need overwhelming evidence of like insanity. Like, I just feel like if this was a UK court, it would be so hard to prove that she didn't have the mental capacity to be held responsible for what she did to those children. It would be really, really hard. I don't know because I know they spoke about diary entries and the fact that she was on a lot of medication. Like, I just cannot imagine that would be enough to find her not guilty of like premeditated murder. What do you guys think? What do you think? She should be found guilty of murder, or do you think she should be found not guilty? I'm leaning in one particular direction. I think you guys can tell where I'm leaning.
Which is going to be really complicated. But there are some factors that they have to go off of. Like you said, she did do a stay at McLean. She had been treated in multiple different ways for kind of postpartum issues she was dealing with. And right now, there's actually a civil lawsuit going on where her husband has sued some of her doctors, claiming that she didn't get the care she received, which ultimately led to the death of her children.
Yeah, we talk about that civil lawsuit actually in this episode because it's substantial here, the fact that he's saying, okay, she was going through something. I mean, if you look at all of the evidence, the things that we've talked about, he's saying she didn't do this with the mens rea, with the intent, with the premeditation. She had a break. She had this psychosis. And I'm wondering, just based on your experience in the legal side of things, is that something that will come in the trial?
The civil lawsuit, I think, I don't know is the short answer, but I think there's going to be argument about whether or not it comes in at trial, because it's certainly a gray area. And I think, probably Lindsay Clancy's team will want it included to show that perhaps her husband agrees. We don't know if her husband is going to testify. I would assume, since he's one of the closest people to the situation, he's.
Man, I feel so bad for the husband. God, I don't want to imagine, but can you imagine being in his shoes as he went down into the basement and saw his children? Can you imagine? Oh my God.
The witness, I'll assume he'll take the stand and that it could come up as a part of his testimony for sure, but we don't know for certain that that will be introduced as a part of the case. But it is really interesting because you mentioned like premeditation versus psychosis. I think that's going to be the crux of the argument. The state is arguing, or in this case, the Commonwealth is arguing that the time that Lindsay Clancy sent her husband away to pick up takeout food was, the perfect enough distance away that.
Honestly, I forgot about that detail. I mean, that in itself, it screams premeditation, because she sent him away far enough for long enough so that she could do what she wanted to do. Obviously, there's no way of proving that she did. She sent him to get the takeout for that purpose, but the story, it kind of makes sense.
She had made that choice and premeditated that so that he'd be gone long enough for
do
her
it.
to do the crime that she had planned in her own head. Her team is going to say, no, that was just a place they got takeout all the time, and she kind of snapped, for lack of a better term, once he left.
Okay, there's so many things to consider here. And something you pointed out, whether Patrick is actually going to testify, I'm leaning toward probably yes, given that he obviously knew her very well, is the father of the children, and discovered the bodies. And this is one of the recent filings, too, that the Commonwealth has asked that his 911 call be allowed in as evidence to really show, okay, this is what's happening. He comes in, XYZ, kind of the order of events. And in their motion, they talked about something that I think is kind of interesting, talking about the way that the children were found with the ligatures or the exercise bands around their necks. So basically they're talking about whether it was tied kind of like a shoelace, easy to get rid of, or whether it was knotted up, and tied really tightly. And it's kind of interesting, their arguments that they're talking about here, whether Lindsay just tied them and then left and, attempted suicide on her own, or whether she actually had to physically, and I know that this is really hard to talk about, but she had to physically strangle each of them, which is very personal, very intimate, shows, I believe in the filings that said atrocity and cruelty. What do you make of, the Commonwealth wanting to include all of this?
I mean, this is so hard to talk about, right? And I think that, unfortunately, in order to try and prove their case, the Commonwealth is going to have to talk about some really gory details and have witnesses talk about these gory details, because the Commonwealth does claim this was premeditated, deliberate murder.
If she's found not guilty of premeditated murder, what will happen? Will she be found guilty by way of insanity? And if that happens, does she get sent to like a psychiatric prison instead of like a general population prison? Like, what are the alternatives in terms of the sentencing? Because I imagine there's no way that she walks away from this scot-free, right? Like, she's going away, but I imagine, where is the question? Like, there's no way she gets away with this, right?
And therefore, they're going to try to show that Lindsay Clancy, did the work and made the effort to kill her children deliberately. And this is when kind of, first off, nuanced little detailed things like the way an exercise band was tied would become a piece of evidence. At the same time, this is when both sides will just theorize about what that means. The Commonwealth might try and introduce an expert who can talk about the way the ligatures were tied, even if that's a police officer who has seen maybe something similar in previous crimes. And the prosecution will try and say, the way this was tied shows you that Lindsay Clancy did this on purpose, or that it took time, or that, if you're in a state of psychosis, this wouldn't have been possible. The defense will try and say, my client doesn't even remember what happened. She was, not in her own mind at the time when this
That's what she's claiming. She doesn't remember.
was going on. And that's going to be really where the jury has to think about this. Juries aren't experts, right? They're supposed to not be experts. Juries are just regular people
Making
who
a
have
judgment
regular
call.
jobs, who show up and listen to this evidence. And these lawyers who are arguing this case are going to have to think, what's a jury going to think based on how these exercise bans were tied? What are they going to infer from that, and what can we make them infer from that?
To me, I don't doubt for a second that she probably had postpartum depression. I'm not questioning that at all. Like, I'm sure she had that. There's evidence for her having that. But I still think that it was a premeditated thing. I think that the depression was really bad and she was just not in her right state of mind. I think that she was really, really mentally not herself. And that pushed her, for some reason, to do what she did. Maybe she rationalized it that the depression would go away if her kids weren't there anymore. Whether that is insanity or not, I don't know. I don't know what the legal definition of insanity is in America. Man, it's just an awful case, isn't it?
And like you said, it's really tough to talk about. In our reporting, I mean, some of these details we can't even get into because it's just too much for, television.
I mean, when you're talking through and you're talking about all of it, you keep using the word nuance. And to me, I think that that is huge in this case, because if you look at it as an overarching thing, this is a woman, a mother who's accused of murdering, strangling 3 of her children. Terrible, devastating. But then, as you said, the nuance of it all kind of adds up to be, okay, was this premeditated, cold-blooded murder? Did she have a break? Did she snap, so to speak? And the jury of it all is what's so important. I mean, as you said, this is a jury of her peers. People don't want to think about something like this because it's so devastating, any life lost. But the fact that we have 3 young kids, the oldest was age 5.
Oh my God. The oldest was only 5. So we're talking toddlers and infants. This is diabolical.
Youngest was 8 months old. I mean, it's so tough to talk about. And this has
God.
been a highly publicized case. So in terms of finding a jury pool that hasn't been tainted, I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
I think the questionnaire for the dury and the questions they're asked during voir dire, during jury impanelment, is going to be so important because that the defense is going to be looking for mothers, right? Mothers who can be on that jury, who can have, who maybe could have sympathy for the postpartum experience.
Any mothers watching this right now, I mean, talk to me. Like, did you have postpartum depression? And was it ever so bad that you thought of doing something like this? I know that's quite a personal question, and feel free to not answer if you want, but I just want to know if it's common to have feelings of wanting to do things like this.
At the same time, there might be some mothers who the prosecution wants on the jury who would be so horrified that a mother could ever do this to her
something like this to her kids.
that
Yeah.
they'd be someone who the prosecutors would think would be likely to convict. So I think mothers are going to be probably the most analyzed and hotly debated jurors to take this impanelment. Fathers as well, parents are they're gonna be, the lawyers on both sides are gonna be considering the roles that parents play in all of this.
Honestly, wow. So I think the case is ongoing. I think, the case has started, I think, as of last week. I'm going to follow it with great interest because this is such a horrific story. I don't have kids. I want to have kids one day. I've heard of postpartum depression, but I had no idea that it could lead someone to do something like this. Like, this is just... this is one of the worst crimes I've ever heard committed. Like, this is 5 years old was the oldest kid. The youngest was 8 months. That is a baby. That is a baby. That's not even a toddler. That baby probably couldn't even walk, couldn't even crawl yet, most likely. 8 months. I mean, to do this to any child, let alone your own child. I'm really struggling. I'm really struggling to imagine a parent being able to do that. Like, I'm going to follow. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And if you did, check out this video right here and hit the join button below. See you there.